I'm Noor Naqschbandi, and I'm heading the Sustainable Consumption Program at GIZ. I would like now to introduce the panel with whom we would like to discuss the information that we just have received from Karen. If we could have the next slide, and if I could ask my colleagues to switch on their video. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the panel, and I'm really happy about the colleagues who are joining. We have Dedy, who is the science-based target engagement manager for Southeast Asia and Oceania at the Carbon Disclosure Project. Good evening, Dedy.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. I'm happy that you're here. We have Evelyn. Evelyn is advisor on economic and social policy at the International Trade Union Confederation, and she's also board member at the Ethical Trading Initiative. Hi, Evelyn. Nice that you're here. Last but not least, we have Anne. Anne is the vice CEO of PT Pan Brothers, which is one of Indonesia's largest garment manufacturer. Hi, Anne.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Nice to be here.
Yes. So we're just going to start the discussion now, but I would like to also invite all of you. I see that we're around 219, 220 participants who at Valentine's Day take off for an hour or so to discuss these important topics. I invite you also to write your questions in the chat, and as said, I'm going to also use your questions in our panel. But let's do a first round, and Anne, I would like to start with you. We have seen the data that Karen has presented, and she's also said that progress is stagnating. To what extent does the data represent the industry we want? And what are, from your point of view, the main root causes for the social, commercial, and also environmental challenges we face in the industry? Anne.
Yeah, thanks, Noor. So to my perspective, hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I've been in this business for 26 years. And through all the thick and thin, before quota and after quota era, the most important thing is actually the purchasing practice, as well as the way the whole supply chain understand each of the business process. What make us efficient, what make us productive, not just the workforce, but also the supply chains on the tier 1, tier 2, as well as tier 3, as well the buyers and the merchandise of this whole thing. I think the better buying practices, as well as the SLCP, the better work of Indonesia really works. And we really hope that this transparency of data can be exchanged so that any hook and nook, any challenges can be driven by solutions, so that the pandemic or any disruptions will be less minimal impact to the lower end or to the workforce, as well as to the brands. Thanks, Noor. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I would like to continue to ask you, Evelyn, basically the same question. When you look at the data, from your point of view, what needs to change and what are the main root causes for the challenges that we face in the industry currently?
Thank you, Noor. Well, certainly the data really reflects the fact that low wages remain endemic in the garment sector. And in terms of root causes, well, I think there are really a variety of factors at play. First of all, I want to emphasize that we cannot ignore the role of the regulatory environment. Minimum wages in many countries are non-existent or dismally low, far below what is needed to provide actually a living wage that gives workers and their families the guarantee of a life with dignity. And just to give you two very practical examples from Eastern Europe, in major garment producing countries, the minimum wage in Romania and Bulgaria before taxes represents less than a quarter of the cost of living basket for an average family. What we also know is that non-compliance in the minimum wage is really rampant in the garment sector. There was a very good study from the ILO on non-compliance in the minimum wage for the garment sector, In Asia, finding that more than 1/3 of garment workers in Pakistan, Thailand, and Indonesia are paid less than the minimum wage, and more than half of workers in India and the Philippines are paid below the legal minimum. And we also know that in some countries, governments are actually putting in place exemptions for the minimum wage in the garment sector, for example, in export processing zones in Guatemala. In terms of freedom of association and collective bargaining, these are two critical tools to allow workers to collectively negotiate decent wages. But what we see is that attacks on these rights are increasing in many countries. The latest ITUC Global Rights Index highlighted that in 113 countries last year, there were such attacks. And we know that there's also state repression of independent trade union activity in a number of garment producing countries. And I want to highlight here in particular Myanmar, where you've actually seen quite violent repression of unions in the last 2 years since the military coup. Finally, and I want to give space for others, of course, I want to emphasize the importance of purchasing practices. They really do play a role in driving low wages. There's really an intersection here. Buyers are often driven by accepting the offer with the lowest price, but when there's high competition between suppliers, they're often pressed to accept offers that are just at or below the cost of production. And that's why it's also really important to make sure that the payment of living wages is actually ring-fenced into production costs so that they're not an adjustment variable. But I'll stop here because I think we'll have more opportunities to discuss what needs to be done in the next round.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And I already see that, for example, Anne and Evelyn, you both have been describing purchasing practices as a really important aspect, and we are going to dig into this a little bit later. But Dedy, now coming to you from your point of view, if we take specifically also the, of course, climate in account, where do you see the challenges and what can we change?
Yeah, thank you, Noor, and hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. I think when we're talking about the climate change, definitely the positive side is that 5 years ago or a couple of years ago, I think it's still, something that really far away from the business, but we're moving towards a better one. But of course, we need to acknowledge that there are some gaps that we still need to fill in. So I'm working at the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is how the company could move forward the alignment of their climate reduction aligned with the Paris Agreement, which is basically aligning with the science here. What we're seeing here, also what Karen has already shared during the presentation, also it is about the data quality, right? Because we will always encourage the company to start taking action as soon as possible. So don't wait until the perfection of the data here. We always encourage the company to start from even the lowest level of the data, which is the estimation data of the emissions. So that you can start counting your emissions, and then you can start also taking action how to reduce that emissions. What we're also seeing is that it's about the difference of the capacity between the different tier of the suppliers that Ibu Anne already mentioned. Sometimes it's different, perspective between the big buyers and also the small suppliers. They have different capacity in terms of the team and also familiarity with the climate change, even in how to conduct and also collect the data. Sometimes that, becoming the key problems here. And therefore, I think it's important also to bring up the climate change, not only as an environmental practice, but also how we build a business case for doing the climate change. And that's what we're always trying to do in the Science-Based Target, is that, climate change is saving the world and saving the planet, but it also makes a business case sense for you to also basically avoiding some of the climate risks that might danger your overall business here. And I would like to also, echoing what Evelyn mentioned about the regulation side here. I guess especially in the region that I handle in Asia, I think regulation becoming a very part why company doing the climate change. Especially, it's also this discrepancy between the mandatory regulation from the government or the voluntary initiative like SBTi here. We can see this is like the complementary each other, but sometimes we do need support from the government to tackle all of these problems. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you, Noor.
Thank you very much. I would just like to shortly maybe go into this question of purchasing practices. Anne and Evelyn, you both came from maybe different sides, but we want to talk together about the issues to this point. What needs to be changed, to both of you, the question, what needs to be changed in order to drive the progress and to also have a different outcome with regard to purchasing practices? What do we need to do to make it very short and crispy, the question? First of all, to you, Anne, what is working well and what needs to be changed? And the same, basically, Evelyn, if I can ask you the same question, if we can focus on this topic.
Okay, thanks, Noor. That's very clear. So we in the International Apparel Federation Forum actually have reached out also to SAC, and therefore we also have a group of STPI to ensure that whatever it is that we discuss it with a clear mind and full hand. We do understand that the brands, the retailers have also challenges. We also have our challenges, but how to ensure that our challenges, the inefficiency within that communications can be reduced, and also how, because we are not only talking about productivity or inefficiency in the production floor. We should also focus on how to ensure that the brands, when they do purchase practice, they also purchase it with also efficiency at their end. So this discussion really an open mind, a set, and also positive mindset, so that we reduce any excess or what we call it any fats within the supply chain, so that we can actually push it down, so that we can have a better working place for everyone. We are not only talking on the work floor, but mostly on the work floor right now, but throughout everyone. So the work-life balance is not just one-sided, but overall. So that's the key. So this discussion has started actually since pandemic, because all of us realize that pandemic is actually the worst disruption ever. That is actually a learning curve for everyone to start the dialogue among the industries. And, you know, the challenges that Dedy mentioned, what Evelyn mentioned as well, we can always discuss as long as we are solution oriented, and we believe that this holistic resilience is good for everyone, not just for one party to another. So the open mindset and also a crystal clear that solutions, not pointing fingers, are what we need in this industry.
Okay.
Back to you, Noor.
Thank you very much, Anne. So not pointing fingers. Evelyn, from your point of view, since you have been also coming to this topic of purchasing practices, and I guess it's really critical to look into it. Where do you see right now the situation, and what needs to be changed so that we have a stronger progress there?
Well, a couple of things. I think first of all, within agreements between buyers and suppliers, not all agreements contain criteria around social responsibility, fair labor practices, although increasingly more and more agreements do exist, but sometimes they're not very specific around the expectations for respect for trade union activity, dialogue with unions on wages, payment of living wages, etc. So having those criteria, I think, inside can be very helpful. The second thing has to do with separating out wages as itemized costs within purchasing agreements, which can help make sure that decent wages are being paid. And also when there are, let's say, changes to orders, or there are some adjustments that need to be made, that wages are not the sort of downward variable, adjustment variable, let's say, between in buyer and supplier agreements. And the last thing is, I just want to highlight in terms of where this has been working well. I want to highlight that there is actually a global agreement between major brands and trade unions within the garment and textile sector called ACT. And ACT has actually negotiated a framework around fair purchasing practices to ensure living wages in the sector. And I would like to do a bit of promotion, because I think that it's a very important model for brands to take a look at.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for giving a concrete example. Dedy, if I can come back to you, I think an important aspect is we talked about legislation, we have international, we have the national legislation, but in all this, of course, the country voices and the production country voices are important. And my question would be, how can we listen to the and engage production country voices in the journey towards an industry we want? What are your views there? And I'm really happy also that we are talking right now in on a platform, you being, if I'm not wrong, in Indonesia, and I'm here in Germany. So how do we engage these voices?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Noor, for the great question. I guess what we're trying to do always in the Science-Based Targets Initiative is this is coming from the very scientific, decarbonization pathway, right? Which is coming from the Paris Agreement and coming from the International Energy Agency, which is basically decarbonization the whole world. But if we're talking about the fairness of the climate, it is not about, every country need to, decarbonize in the same manner here. We need to acknowledge that there are some gaps in it, capacity that I mentioned, and also sometimes it's about, sometimes there are some regionality that need to be specified. For example, one country might have a different set of emission data that will be different with the other countries here. What we're trying to do right now is developing what we called as the sectoral pathways, that is regional pathways. So we listen to all of the voices from the Asian countries that probably way more different when we're talking about the climate champions like in the Europe or North America, because they're in the different level of the engagement and also different level of the capacity. Therefore, we are developing this to capture also more local context. So Ibu Ain also mentioning several of the regulations in Asia that actually the main drivers of doing the company doing of the sustainability. But it's also good that we actually acknowledge that there are some differences data-wise in terms of the regional and each other here. So we're trying to do that one first thing first in terms of the getting the science right, which is not always the best way to do, but it's also acknowledging that there are some gap here. And obviously we during some of the development of the pathways or the guidance, we always try to capture all of the experts that are not only from the developing countries, but not only from developed countries, but also from developing countries here. Asia representative is important for developing this because the biggest emission coming from us also, but it's also unfortunately we will be the one who is mostly affected by the climate change. So it's fair enough to also listen to our voices in terms of the developing this climate commitments here. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dedy. And because you unfortunately have to leave a little bit earlier, so I'd ask you the same basic question and maybe also a final word from your side before you unfortunately need to leave a little bit earlier. So how can we, like today, also engage more strongly the voices from production countries? What would be your recommendations for all of us?
So yes, thanks, Noor. Thanks, everyone. So our message to the industry, actually, the whole producers, as well as the brands, the retailers, as well, even everyone who really care about this industry. That's one thing. Lesson learned from the pandemic is humanity. If we are really human, we should understand the word data, how we analyze the transparency of the data and translate it back to the human. Environment at the other end is another challenges of us, but without the human living in our earth, to have a cleaner earth would be nonsense. So in a way, like what Pak Dedy has mentioned earlier, everyone has our challenges, but again, what he pointed out before, if we can actually ensure the lesson learned from each of our failure of, for example, factory going down or brand going down, what is the lesson learned from that? Let's really detail out, and then that's the solutions that we need to discuss among us openly. Not, not shamefully, because this is not something that we should be ashamed of. It's there. it's actually a good learning lessons for those who have brands that goes chapter 11, for those who have factory that, you know, the workers strike and so on. But the open communications, open dialogue, solution-oriented, positive mindset, and transparency of the data need to be analyzed together and being decided, and that this will drive the humanity to the maximum, and therefore we can actually take care of our earth based on our humanity as well. So that's my message to everyone who are listening today. Because at the end of the day, what we care about is clothing the world with our humanity. So let's not forget that we do not want to go into nudity. We are a modern people where clothing should be actually produced with clean and fair environment.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for being also here, and wishing you all the best, because you need to leave a little bit earlier. That's what you told us, so I hope you can make it. But for the rest of us, we have received quite a lot of questions. So I would, as I said, first of all, thank you very much, and please also continue to ask your questions. But as said in the beginning, we will not be able, in the short amount of time that we have, to answer and take all questions, but I'm not now going to start so we don't lose more time. Evelyn, there's one directed directly to you, a question for Evelyn. Can the EU CSR due diligence legislation put more pressure on buyers to improve compliance with the minimum wage? Yeah, just putting it there. What is your view on that? Generally, I mean, you were talking about legislation. This is now specific on the EU legislation.
Yeah, and maybe I could also, because I'm conscious of the fact that this panel will close, to give some more general remarks also. But no, of course we welcome initiatives internationally and regionally, you know, for strengthened due diligence, and for ensuring that that companies take responsibility in terms of the payment of living wages. I want to really emphasize here more generally, companies have a responsibility, but also governments have a responsibility. And that's, you know, if I had to kind of synthesize, you know, key messages for this panel, that's something that I really want to emphasize. We talked about, you know, living wage estimates, or there's a presentation about the living wage gap. There were metrics used around, you know, from wage indicator on living wage estimations, which are of course very helpful in terms of helping companies understand where they need to go. But what I also want to really emphasize here is that, you know, resorting to, you know, wage payment through these independent methodologies, that's not going to be enough. What we actually need to do, of course, we need to know what the cost of living is, but it's very important to define wage levels with the involvement of trade unions as direct representatives of workers. They need to be involved in decisions concerning their livelihoods. And so what that means is that companies should be engaging and encouraging collective bargaining to help ensure fair pay. And there's also a broader business case to this in terms of good industrial relations and workplace retention and productivity. Companies need to adjust their purchasing practices as well, as what I said before. But what I also want to emphasize is the importance of regulation and the role of governments, because we need a regulation to create a level playing field between companies and avoid downward competition on the basis of low wages and labor costs. And governments can only do this through setting and enforcing adequate minimum wages that are evidence-based, that take into account the needs of workers and their families, and that are developed in a transparent way with trade unions. And there are also important international frameworks that already exist on this, including Convention 131 on minimum wages. So just to give you a sort of overview of what really needs to be done, and it's on a variety of different levels here.
Thank you very much. Evelyn, I'd like to ask one more question to you, and also Dedy, it's the same, basically same question also for you. You both have been emphasizing the importance of legislation, but at the same time we see, and right now you're also invited by one of those multi-stakeholder initiatives where different stakeholders are coming together. Could you shortly say, I mean, what is the role of a multi-stakeholder initiative vis-a-vis regulation? I think that might be also important for a lot of our viewers right now to understand where you see also multi-stakeholder initiatives, be it the industry we want, be it a lot of others which we have been mentioning today, or which are there. Dedy, maybe you start, and then Evelyn, and looking at the time, we would then after that really ask you to give your very final conclusions. Dedy, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be quick. I guess it's about what we call the ambition loop here, right? So the multi-stakeholder, basically the one that driven by the business, can drive also the the ambition from the government here. What we're trying to do is actually do that. So we're trying from the voluntary initiative like the SBTI disclosure platform through this carbon disclosure project, and then we can showcase that the company indeed can make it possible to reduce the emissions from my expertise, right? And that that also drives that it is also becoming the responsibility for the government to acknowledge that and also to count for the private sector contribution in the climate action. So this loop that the company can do more and pushing the agenda to the government to do more in the regulation side can really be one of the key of the practice with the multi-stakeholder partnership here.
Thank you very much. And Dedy, just because you're there, can you give us just a final conclusion from your side, and also maybe next steps which you see, next immediate steps that we should take so that we have the industry we want?
Exactly. Okay, I guess it's come back again to the data that I mentioned at the beginning. So don't wait until the data is perfect. So starting right now, we always encourage companies to disclose their data to the public, public disclosure system like the CDP. Why? Because the company can increase the transparency that are being mentioned by the other panel, Ibu Ane, but also to assess how their framework actually is going, whether some improvement needs to be elaborated in the data here. And then the second one is going through the target setting, because target setting is the one that will also have you track how many target that are in line with the overall target, but also how you track that progress against over your activities in the business here. Once you done the disclosure and target setting, you may get into the more, the more ambitious target over the years and then being validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So I always encourage the company to start now and don't wait until that perfection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Evelyn, the same two questions to you. First of all, role MSI regulation, and then of course your final remarks.
Sure. Well, I really see MSIs as very complementary to regulation. Look, I sit as a very proud member on the board of the Ethical Trading Initiative. We have a very ambitious base code where living wages is part of that, among other criteria. What it does is really drives companies to go beyond what is legally required in the companies that they source to really do better. And as Dedy said, I think that it is also very important as a signal to policymakers that it is possible to go above the minimum. It shows that there are companies that are willing and able to afford higher wages, who are able to engage in terms of social dialogue, and who are able to have good labor practices within their supply chains. I also see the role of MSIs, having sat on one as a really important tool for dialogue between social partners, other stakeholders, and companies. To also resolve disputes in an amicable way when they exist, raise issues of grievances. So I think that they can be very helpful and very complementary to regulation, in short.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we knew this before. The time was very limited, but thank you for your inputs, also for Anne's input, who had to leave a little bit earlier. I would just like to sum it up maybe with one or two sentences. First of all, thank you very much also for the vivid discussion. You might see also our panelists, if you look into the chat, there is a lot going on. We need some time later to go through it. Thank you for the vivid discussion there. And I just want to finish to say, we do see also the data shows that the current silos which we have in the industry slow progress. So we need somehow to come together to collaborate, and the industry we want is a platform which is exactly trying to do this. And the dots are there. There are a lot of good dots. We need to connect those dots. And thank you, all of you, for being here today with us. Bye.
Wonderful. What a lively discussion. I really appreciate all of these interventions and look forward continuing these conversations. Now I would like to invite Matthias Altman, Manager and Policy Analyst at the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, to reflect on some of these insights. Thank you. And if you could turn off your video. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Karen. Thank you for having me, and thank you also actually for using the OECD Garment and Footwear Sector Forum as the launching pad for your industry dashboard last year, and for returning to the forum this year to publish your updated metrics. So I hope we will see you in following years as well, and make this an institution that the forum will be the place where new data will be available on your dashboard. In the interest of time, let me reflect briefly on how I see connections between the three focus areas of the dashboard and the work at the OECD, also reflecting thereby on the discussion we just had. Most importantly for us at the moment is indeed living wages, and particularly the gap between minimum wages and living wages in key producing countries. I think the figures clearly show that what the scale of this challenge still is. So garment workers are receiving an average just over half of the wage they need to reach a decent living is not acceptable. And we see the gap widening, not least because minimum wages are not set in sync with inflation at the moment. But I also see opportunity reflected in the figures, because cheap and disposable labor should no longer be considered a competitive advantage of countries. It's rather instead now with the rising move to mandatory due diligence, certainly something where companies should actually be aware that a low wage and a high gap actually between minimum wages and living wages can also be an indicator of a high risk sourcing destination. So when living wages are not being paid, often in these countries, we have a lot of other risks, human rights risks as well, including issues with overtime, issues with health and safety, but even issues with child or forced labor. So this is something where with the figures actually should also be used by companies as an indication actually to assess the risk and then do their part in actually helping to prevent the harm from these human rights issues. At the OECD, actually, we also associate the slow progress on living wages with companies still struggling to understand how to implement living wage commitments in their operations and purchasing practices. So we were therefore working at the moment on a practical handbook for businesses to enable living wage and incomes in global supply chains that will be launched this year. We also have a session on living wages at our Garment Forum on Thursday, where we, among others, discuss progress on this handbook. So this is where we think our contribution can at the moment be to this of one first focal area of the dashboard. Then quickly turning to purchasing practices, which has been the focus of last year's Garment Forum. But we returned to the subject at this year's forum actually in one session dealing with buyer-supplier collaboration on a Friday afternoon. And also on Friday morning, we have a very interesting session in collaboration actually with the industry we want, where we have a split panel between Hanoi, Vietnam, and Paris, where we really would like to have a discussion on eye level between producer country representatives and consumer country representatives on how impactful due diligence can be achieved through collaboration across the supply chain and support from buyers to their suppliers. So that's what I would like to recommend to you to be part of on Friday morning at our Garment Forum. I'll stop here and hope to see many of you at the Garment Forum on Thursday and Friday. I also hope actually to see all of you again in 2024 when we have then the next iteration of the We Industry We Want dashboard. So with that, thank you very much for having me, and wishing you all the best, and us all really good luck in making progress towards the industry we want. Thank you.